The goal of this video is to help you understand functions and function notation. And this is super important because we're going to be using functions and function notation a lot through this whole course, right? But this is just kind of an intro to what functions are and the notation we use with functions. All right, so here's our definition of a function. Right? A function is a relationship between a set of inputs and a set of outputs in which every input has exactly one output. Okay, it's a relationship between a set of inputs and a set of outputs in which every input has exactly one output. So it's this kind of a hard definition to understand, but the best kind of analogy I've heard to make this easier is to think of this as kind of like a machine, right? So I have this kind of little picture here. So you can kind of imagine this is a function machine, right? And the basic idea is that a function, right, basically is some kind of machine where you put in an input, right, and this function will do something with that input, and it will spit out an output, right? So you put some kind of input into the machine, right, and then the machine does something with that, and then it spits out or it outputs some information, right? We put some information into the machine does its job, and then it spits out an output. Okay. Here's kind of an example that you probably all have seen before, right? So you've probably seen this at like Target or Walmart or something like this. This is a price scanner, right? So you think about it. What is this price scanner for? You take some kind of item you want to purchase and you scan the barcode, and then it tells you what the price is, right? This is exactly like a function, right? You've got an input and then you have an output, right? So in this case, what are we inputting? You're inputting the barcode. You put the barcode in, right? The number from the barcode, and then it outputs the price, right? So that's all a function is. You put in some information, you input it, and then it looks up, in this case, the price, and it spits out some information, the output. You put in the input, the function does something, and then it sends out information called the output. All right, so how in math do we notate this? Okay, so in math, for the input, most of the time we use x, right? So x usually represents the input, right? And then we use this for the output. Okay, and the way you read this is not fx, or not f times x. This is f of x. Okay, I'll say that again, right? This is f of x, right? So our input is usually denoted by just an x, and the output is denoted by f of x, right? So again, with our machine, it's kind of like you're putting in the input, the x, and then the machine is spitting out your output, f of x. Okay, so x is your input, f of x is the output. All right, there's two more terms, right? And I know I'm kind of giving you a lot of information here, and it may seem super abstract. We're going to do an example after I finish going through all this vocabulary. Okay. All right. So you also need to know these two words, domain and range. Here's what they are. The set of all possible inputs is called the domain. The set of all possible outputs is called the range. Okay. So basically, domain is the list of all the possible things that you could input into the function machine, right? Range is the list of all the possible things that could come out, that could be the output of the function. All right, so let's look at some examples. All right, so I have this data, right? So let's say we have some kind of computer that has, all this data in there, right? So we have some student names, and each student has an ID number, and each student has an age, right? And this list is pretty short. I only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 students. Of course, in real life, we'd have a super long list, but that's not going to fit on the screen. So let's just say we've got these 5 students, okay? All right, and let's say we have a function right here. So let's say that f is our function, And f is a function that takes in a student ID number and then outputs the student's name, right? So if you put in an ID number, it will output that student's name. Okay, so let's make sure we understand what's going on here, right? So our input, right? Remember, input is the x. Our input, or x, right? That is the ID number. Okay, and the output, and remember, for output we use f of x. Okay, so the output will be the name. Okay, so you're going to input an ID number and output a name. All right, so let's take a look at some of these questions here. First question, what is f of 36? Again, the way we read this is f of 36. It doesn't say f36, it doesn't say f times 36, right? These parentheses do not mean multiplication, right? It says, what is f of 36? And what this really means is, what is our output going to be when we input 36? Okay, f of 36 is the output when we are inputting 36. What is the output when we input 36? Right? Well, let's think about it. Our function, remember, it takes in an ID number and outputs a student name. So if 36 is an ID number, then the name that should be outputted is Bobby. Right? So we could write it like this. F of 36 is equal to Bobby. Okay, and you got to really understand what this notation means, right? What does this say? This says the output of our function when we have an input of 36 is Bobby. That's all this says. Okay, let's look at a second one. What is f of 23? Again, what does that mean? This is saying, what's the output going to be when you have an input of 23? Okay, and you can kind of take a look at our table. And when we have an input of 23, the output's going to be the name Ellie. So we would say this, f of 23 is Ellie. Okay, again, it's really important you understand what this means, right? F of 23, right? So this is the output of our function, right? So the output of our function when we input 23 is going to be Ellie. That's all that says. Okay, third question. When will f of x equal Danny? Right? Or in other words, when will our output be equal to Danny? When will this machine output the name Danny? Right? Well, remember, it outputs a student name when you put an input of an ID number. So it's going to output Danny when we have a student ID number of 47. Right? So we could say this. F of x is equal to Danny, when our input, our x, is, 47. Okay? All right, and on this next slide, I'm just going to kind of have the typed up version of what I just wrote here, because I really think it's important that you have that exact language down. Okay, so we had said for f of 23 equals Ellie. What does that mean, right? And I really want you to pause this and write this down exactly in your notes. What does this mean? This means the output of our function when we have an input of 23 is Ellie. Okay, for 3, we had said our output is going to be Danny when the x value is 47, or f of x equals Danny when x equals 47. Again, what does that mean? The output of our function is going to be Danny when the input, the x value, is 47. So please make sure you have that in your notes. All right, we're going to look at one other example, and, oh, I forgot. We have to talk about domain and range here. Okay, so what is the domain of f? Remember, domain, that's just the set of all possible inputs. Range is just a set of all possible outputs. Okay, all right, so inputs, what were the inputs? The inputs were the student ID numbers. Okay, so the domain, and we'll use these curly brackets for our list, is just all the possible ID numbers. Okay, and I'll put them in order, right? So all the possible ID numbers were 23, 36, 47, 52, 54. Easy as that, right? It's just all the possible input values. These are the things that could possibly be inputted. Okay. 5, what's the range? That's just a set of all the outputs. What are the possible things that could be outputted? Right? So this function outputs names. Right? So the things that could be possibly outputted are Abby, Bobby, Casey, Danny, and Ellie. Right? That's it. That's the set of all possible outputs. All right. For this one, you are going to do most of this on your own. Okay, so now I've changed the function, and this time we're going to use g for our function. Okay, I'll do the first one, and then the last ones you are going to do on your own, and that'll be your you try it problems, and we'll be checking those in class. Okay, so let's see our definition. G is a function that takes in a student's name and then outputs that student's age. Right? So the input, our x, is going to be a name. And then the output, remember output, this time we're using g. It's going to be like this. G of x is going to be the age. Okay, so input is x, this case g of x, that output is the age. Okay, so this question asks, what is g of Danny? Right, g of Danny. In other words, what is the output going to be when we input the name Danny? So remember, we're going to input a name, and we're going to output the age. And Danny's age is 15. Right, so here's our answer. G of Danny is equal to 15. Remember, what this means is our output of our function, when we have an input of Danny, is going to be 15. All right, I would like you to finish these 4 questions. What is g of Casey? When will g of x equal 15? What's the domain of g? What's the range of g? And we'll talk about these in class.